I'm feeling honored and very happy to introduce Dr. Esther Tippman in this AICTE-sponsored international conference. Up to you, Dr. Esther. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Anush, and thank you everyone for having me. It's a great privilege to be with you today. And let me also apologize to everyone for yesterday, that I couldn't join yesterday. Unfortunately, we had a really bad cyber attack at my university and we came on campus and all the systems were down, Wi-Fi, internet, everything. So unfortunately, I couldn't be with you yesterday. Today, I'm working from home because they're still restoring our systems. So apologies for that inconvenience. I'm really delighted to be with you, and I'm looking forward to sharing a couple of ideas and then also to answer any questions that you may have. Yeah, and as Anush said, we met, I think it was 2013 when he was one of my students. I still remember him. So a lot of things have happened since, and it's great to see Anush having done so well. And it's great to reconnect also today as part of that conference. So what I would like to do is, what I would like to do is, I suppose, before we speak about that Harvard Business Review article, I would like to share with you a couple of thoughts around digital multinationals, because these ideas, they will really canvas and form the backbone to, I suppose, this HBR article and a couple of other things that we have been working on. And I thought it may interest you because obviously digitization is an unstoppable trend. And a lot of international firms today are obviously either going digital or were indeed born as digital firms. If that's okay, I'll just get started. So first, I suppose, maybe give you a little bit of background to the context that I would be researching and what kind of exposure we have here in Ireland to digital firms. So so I seem to have some background. Yeah, okay, thanks. Just some background noise. Thank you so much. Yeah, so in Ireland, we really have, I suppose, the European hotspot for a lot of digital multinationals, typically from the US, North America, also some Asian ones, but not predominantly yet. But often Dublin or London, for that matter, is one of their first landing spots as they start to internationalize. So even back then, 15 years ago, I started passing the area. When I was commuting into work, I was studying the area where those firms started to set up offices. I mean, that's 15 years ago. So for example, Google was the first one that came. At that time, nobody knew what Google would become later on, yeah, this really global powerhouse. But I saw them setting up, I saw them growing and growing and growing. And that was amazing to see. And then more and more firms, major internationals started to, someone's scribbling here on my slides. More and more multinationals started to come and follow. Yeah, so then there was Facebook, Twitter, Dropbox, and you see many, 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 many more here. Some of those companies you may be aware of. But really what we saw was these digital firms internationalizing very quickly, growing very rapidly. And I became interested in understanding that. How can they do that? What's going on here? And how is digitalization enabling all of that? So over the last couple of years, there's a bunch of my work that would have looked into related questions. And also, I suppose, if you're interested maybe in teaching some of those things that I mentioned today, maybe the case study could be of interest as well, if you're looking for maybe classroom materials that are related to it. But let me introduce maybe quickly a couple of studies that I think are really important, as I said, as forming the backbone to understanding digital firms and how they internationalize, but then also obviously to set us up for that HBR article that we would like to speak about a little bit more. So one piece that we have worked on relates to born digitals and how they internationalize. That was an invited commentary in the Journal of International Business Studies, co-authored with Sinead Monahan and with Nicole Coviello. Those of you that are familiar with internationalization models in generally, they go back many, many years. I mean, there's a huge heritage here on internationalization models, but typically the context, as you see here in the images of that prior work, was I suppose, firms that were selling physical goods, right? And often needed quite complex supply chain structures, global value chain structures, heavy, and in this case, in fact, very heavy machinery. Also, often these firms, because they operated in a B2B context, they also needed quite a physical footprint in local markets to be able to engage with channel partners, with companies. So often the underlying thrust of those original internationalization models was firms internationalize slowly. There's a huge amount of risk. You take incremental steps and you slowly start building your position in international markets because you had to build networks. Now, obviously, then we started to revisit that because what we saw, as I said at the start, was, these firms internationalize early, they internationalize rapidly often, and they do bold steps. It wasn't incremental what they were doing. So we started to question, I suppose, some of the underlying logics of these traditional internationalization models. And we said, like, okay, let's look at these firms that can be termed born digitals. So these are firms, obviously, that are not going digital. They're obviously established firms that are undergoing digital transformation. We're looking here specifically at firms that were born on the internet, if you want to use that word. So they have digital offerings, and they heavily rely on digital processes as well within their business model. Obviously, they come in many different forms and fashion. You may think about digital platforms like LinkedIn, digital solutions like Slack, or digital online retailers such as Expedia. I'm sure you have maybe local versions of that in India as well that would speak to similar types of business models. And as I said, like those born digitals, obviously they have the capacity to connect to international markets with, I suppose, instantaneously. You press a button, right? You put your website live, for example, and you have a connection to international markets. So sometimes they may become accidental internationalists. You may not want to sell internationally, but by being on the internet, you accidentally may be pulled into international markets, and it takes off from there for you. Or else maybe it can also be a very committed, intentional strategy that they really want to become international players and do so often early and rapidly. What we then also look at in this paper is, I suppose, how digitality enables it. And for today, I just would like to speak about two of those different elements. And the one is, for example, the network effects. So often when these firms internationalize, they do so through user networks. So there's often huge network externalities where if you have lead users in certain countries, if you can start generate network effects, you're being pulled into those international markets, and it starts taking off from there through network effects. The other element that is hugely important, I suppose, is the role of automation within digital technologies, because by replacing the human element in transactions, it becomes much more. Well, it becomes easier to internationalize. So think, for example, of Airbnb here, right? I mean, Airbnb typically, before Airbnb, if we wanted to stay in hotels or somewhere internationally, maybe with, not in hotels, if we wanted maybe to stay with a private person internationally, you wanted to trust that person. You would want it to typically to know that person because you're going in someone else's house potentially. But Airbnb obviously has inbuilt trust mechanisms that are replacing that. And that's very interesting, I suppose, because this idea of digital trust coming into it and how that may help internationalization. So just quickly to wrap up on that part of the discussion, lots of opportunities here if you're interested in digital firm internationalization to continue the research, this research trajectory. And another area of interest then is building on it is around, global scaling. And here we did research with Becky Rupert from the University of Toronto and again, Sinead Monaghan. And it also speaks to this idea that a lot of digital firms become global players, major global players very rapidly. So here we have this nice quote from the founder of LinkedIn, Reid Hoffman, who would have said, yeah, you have to move faster because competition from anywhere on the globe may beat you at scale. So really driving it home that, well, becoming a global player for some firms is an absolute mantra, and you have to do so very, very quickly. And what we do in this paper is, I suppose, set out what that as a concept, and how it is underpinned by rapid growth over a period of time, so that you grow more than 20% per annum at least over many, many years. And that you do so by replicating a business model. So they have a business model that they've tried to roll out in a very standardized way across countries. Now, for those of you that are interested in these kinds of topics, in the paper, you will also find, I suppose, an overview of what you see on the left. Maybe what are some of the facilitators and drivers of this global scaling? Some of the areas around the process. How can you actually manage as a firm such a rapid expansion? And some really interesting pointers of interest are in here as well. And then obviously, what are the outcomes? I mean, a lot of firms obviously fail doing so, but if firms are successful, if you think of the Facebooks, the Googles, the LinkedIn, the Dropboxes, and so forth, they really become leading global players. So again, thinking about the outcomes. So just for those of you that are interested in that global scaling aspect, might be some interesting work here and ideas to look at. Now, okay, that brings me over to, I suppose, what I suppose leading into the more practitioner-oriented work that we have done recently. So as I said, I have been interested for many, many years in this digitalization and how digitalization enables, maybe also, yeah, well, either enables, but also causes perhaps challenges for international firms and the way they operate. Now, obviously then the pandemic came. And it probably similar in India. What it meant for those firms here was mass exit from the office, right? So it was a mandated work from home for many, many months. So a great natural experiment around what does maybe 100% remote working mean for organizations? How can they manage it? But after they got used to, okay, we're working more remotely now, or 100% remotely. I mean, those tech firms, they're still 100%, at least in our jurisdictions, 100% remote. But from a leader perspective, you know, it was a very exciting, I mean, it was a challenging time, but also an exciting time in the sense that they could really understand or could question what kind of hybrid model maybe want to adopt in the future. What will the future hold post-pandemic? And that's really what we became interested in was, okay, how do these leaders foresee the future post-pandemic? What kind of challenges will organizations face? What kind of organizational models do they think about? So we started collecting data in summer last year. So that was obviously at the height of the pandemic. And as it was also in India, we were maybe a couple of weeks perhaps ahead in terms of the height of the pandemic, but similar challenges just a few weeks earlier. So it was just around that time when it was the height of the pandemic, but nevertheless, leaders knew we have to start thinking more longer term. Now, so we interviewed leaders of leading multinationals, US multinationals, to get their views. And there were two insights that we gleaned from those interviews. One was around innovation and how to instill innovation in these hybrid models. And that's the first piece that we published in Sloan Management Review. So what we realized there was that the firms actually, they did super well in achieving productivity goals. They were saying we're super productive, we're achieving our efficiency goals. I mean, this is obviously good news, but they were super worried about innovation. They felt in the remote and hybrid models that they were suffering and not doing well as well in their innovation activities as they would like. And that's obviously of concern because productivity is good in the short term, but you need to be able to innovate in the long term. So then we explored with them, well, how do you instill innovation if it's such a challenge? How do you do that from a leader's perspective? And we identified here 2 principles that leaders can use in remote working models or in hybrid working models to help their dispersed teams to innovate better. And one was around purposefully instilling conflict. So really being able as a leader in maybe a virtual environment to initiate debate, that you get multiple perspectives maybe to clash and feed more of one another. And the other one is obviously around also collaboration, that how can you bring together diverse teams? How can they maybe bring together different layers of the organization? So for example, before the pandemic, leaders, they would often travel around the globe, right? They would spend a lot of time in the airport, in transit, visiting different units of the organization. Now they don't do that so much anymore, or not at all. But what they do is maybe to use that time that they would previously spend in the airport to connect with teams virtually that they usually wouldn't interact with. So maybe deep down in the organization, cross-functionally and so forth. Yeah, so it's kind of nurturing these collaborations within the organization that can filter or can spark new ideas. So there were a couple of ideas that we published in Sloan Management Review related to that topic. And then the other big idea that we worked on was around, okay, so what do they think is the future organizational model? Because obviously they were at a stage where they were actively brainstorming and working through these kind of decisions. So some organizations, they already had a very mature perspective as to, okay, this is how we're working through these types of decisions. And other organizations were even more progressed, that they had already chosen what kind of organizational model they want to adopt going forward for their organization. Because one thing for sure, we're not going back to the same, right? Hybrid is here to stay, hybrid models of working, and organizations have to figure out the best way to leverage hybrid. I mean, those that don't, they will fall behind. I mean, that was a given. But the question obviously was how to do that in the best way possible. And that's what we explore in the Harvard Business Review article. So really trying to develop principles for managers, guiding principles, how they can work through those types of decisions. So what we identified were that there are 2 principles that leaders need to think through. So what they have to do first is to think through the task context of the core activities within an organization. So some tasks in an organization are much more relational. Like you need to collaborate, you need to sit down together. It's very much a one-to-one or one-to-many close collaboration. Think about innovation activities, think about knowledge exchange, think about onboarding activities. Other activities are obviously much more transactional, day-to-day routine. They're the ones that will be automated. I mean, if they haven't been automated already, they will become much more automated or enabled at least by technologies. Then the next thing to think through, I suppose, is how important is it for your organization or for the organization to have employees in international markets? And that could be for various reasons. It could be to access new geographies for revenue generation, but it could also be to access talent, right? I mean, your human capital obviously is super important as an organization, and you may be able to tap into key experts or talent in international markets. So again, it's figuring out where do you sit as an organization? Are you more on the low or are you more on the high? And if you use these 2 dimensions, what you get is, I suppose, 4 models for international organizations. Now, this is the version that HBR designed, right? So that you can get a hybrid model that is more transactional centered, or a hybrid model that is more relational centered. And then again, you know, you may have an organization where internationalization in terms of employees in many countries is low or high. Let me share another slide that is a little bit more detailed. So that's the published version, but when we submitted it, we had a slightly different version where you can actually see a little bit more detail. Just one second, if you bear with me. I just screen share another slide for you where you can see the models maybe in a little bit better way. I just make that a little bit bigger for you. Now, so essentially it's the same here. That was the original submission that we made to HBR. For them, they felt in their graphics they couldn't represent the little icons that you see here, but you can see the model, I think, in a little bit better way. So, for example, here in the large hubs organization, what you have as an organization is multiple hubs. They're these big green offices. In your key jurisdictions internationally, and most of your employees are in commuting distance to the office, essentially. Yes, you have low internationalization, and you have a lot of relational tasks. So you want them to be in the office a lot, but they may work the odd day from home because they're in commuting distance. Then you may have a hub satellite organization. So it's a more internationally diversified version of the same model, where you could also say, okay, we have these key offices or these key locations, let's say the one in Asia here, but we also have these hubs, maybe smaller offices dotted around the hub. But again, our employees, they live largely in commuting distance to our hubs or to our satellites. In the distributed organization, what we have is we just maybe have a headquarter kind of office where people live in commuting distance. But then we have, in not so many, but in a couple of international locations, we have employees. And they may be just teleworkers. They may not even have an office, right? So it's all virtual type of work because it's very transactional, standard processes, automated. It's doable to do it like that. Or even to push it further is, well, we may even be able to access talent in other key locations across the globe for whatever reason. And we're highly international, but still it's a lot of transactional work that we're able to actually do that and reintegrate into that model. So this global virtual organization, probably a couple of years or even pre-pandemic, that would have been maybe very visionary, that organizations would have thought that's not possible, but it is absolutely possible, especially younger scaling firms. They're actually using that. We see that quite a lot emerging. And we also see this model emerging a lot in practice amongst the leaders. So I think if that's okay, I may stop here because we can then, I think Anush wanted to ask me a couple of other questions, but then we can also obviously open the floor out to your questions. Thank you.
I just want to ask you, first of all, thank you very much for a nice presentation. And again, I was so inspired by your presentation. I was thinking about different models, how we can work it out and can make it through some research and all. Anyways, so I want to ask you, for my first question as a researcher, as a faculty, how's your experience to crack Harvard Business Review? How much time it took to you? How many revisions and all? Can you brief the whole faculty members and all about that process?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Harvard Business Review and Sloan Management Review, obviously they're practitioner-oriented outlets. Their publication process is quite different to other international journals. Yes, obviously you have your bunch of academic journals like Journal of International Business Studies, Journal of World Business. I mean, the other outlets which have these 2-year to 1 or 2 year, right, multiple rounds, 2 peer reviewer type of process. Now, HBR and Sloan, they are different. So really what they're looking for is quite up-to-date material that speaks to the key challenges that leaders face at that time. And their submission process is just a short pitch of, you think, okay, I have something to tell here. I have some really cool insights, some really good ideas that speak to what is on leaders' mind at the moment. And In Harvard Business Review, you send it directly to an editor, and the editor then brings it to their team, and they quite quickly make a decision. And then they work with you on developing the proposal or developing it to an article, and they do actually a lot of the editing. And that's why I said, like, even the figure, right, that I showed. So this is the one that is up on the website, and this was our original one. So they're quite involved in shaping it and drafting it. And similarly with Sloan Management Review, just that Sloan Management Review, they have a system, an online submission system, but it's very similar. But what we found very helpful was actually in the Sloan Management Review submission system. I mean, you can create your profile, you can log in, obviously, even if you just want to see the system, but they have a couple of pointers and questions that they want you to answer as part of your submission. And I found that very helpful because they ask you, how is it current? What is your audience? I mean, you know, obviously it's leaders, but who? Is it CEOs? Is it executives? Is it founders? Is it, yeah, who is it? What is really new? Like, how is it different to current leadership thinking? So they really ask you a couple of prompts that we found very useful because we felt, well, if we can answer them in a compelling way, we may have something, right? So for those of you that are interested in publishing in those outlets, yeah, that's what we did. We sent it in and were successful. So does that help?
Harvard Business Review, articles are completely different. They do not have that research methodology like Emerald and all have. And they have completely different. So how you started? You know, what was your approach? Like if few of the faculty members, like more than 50, are listening, you approximately 50, if they want to. So what should be the initial step? You know, as a beginner, how what should they keep in mind?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, as you said, it's completely different to publishing in an academic outlet. I mean, obviously, they're looking for your credibility. So you have to also, as part of the submission for both, really show your credibility. And it could be based on, okay, typically for us academics, it's like a study that you actually have some kind of empirical field work or a case study or something that you base it upon, that it's not blue sky thinking. But they don't publish that, but they want to see it. Also for HBR, if you have something coming out, for example, in a top tier journal, they're looking for things maybe just as you know it's coming close to acceptance, maybe you can pitch it into HBR as well, the practitioner-oriented version of your academic article to see would they be interested. Okay, but how to, maybe back to your point or question, Anush, how to approach it. Basically, one of our co-authors is a practitioner, right? So we were a team of 2 academics and 1 practitioner. And that helped us because that practitioner could sanity check all the time for us. Are we hitting the right notes? And we really tried to put ourselves into our practitioner's shoes. We knew these organizations have to make a choice on their hybrid model. This is an important choice. And a lot of managers, they will need guidance how to think through that problem. It's an important problem. What kind of guidance do I want to offer? And then work through, is it a principle? Is it a model? Is it a 3-step process? But it's really, I mean, the audience here are practitioners. They want that if managers read it, that they can bring it into their organization and action it, work through it to guide their organization. Obviously, consultants are reading these types of magazines as well. Yeah, so it's very much, it's perhaps more thinking about for practitioners or consultants. I mean, that's at least our audience, to think through, okay, what tangible steps can I give them that they feel empowered, addressing that key problem. Does that help?
Yeah, definitely. That was wonderful input, Dr. Esther. I have a question regarding your model. So if you don't mind, if you can share that screen again. I had a doubt about the distributed organizations. So my question to you is, which of the organizations would love to go for, distributed organization? What are the benefits there?
So the benefits, do you mean maybe vis-a-vis the global?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the distributed, obviously you get the benefits of some internationalization, but you don't get all the benefits of internationalization. The challenges of this model is obviously you're more dispersed.
Right.
Your challenge, you have to reintegrate more, you have to coordinate more across countries. And that obviously comes with a coordination cost that you have to weigh off against. So the benefit is more access, obviously, to international markets, but it comes at the cost of coordination.
And maybe you compromise on the relation aspect also? Or does that happen here in the distributed one?
Potentially, yes, because you may also have to organize more across time zones. Coordinate perhaps more across time zones. I mean, they're both more on the transactional side, but you still need to coordinate, as you said, and you may have to pass over across time zones. Exactly.
I must say, it's such a beautiful model. I was in love with it the moment I watched it. It's so simple. I think the beauty lies in the simplicity. It was so understandable, and yet, I was thinking, why didn't you talk to me? It was such beautiful and simple to understand. And because I teach international business, I definitely would love to share this with my students. And but again, I'm a little more concerned. Again, sorry, I could not, I was not very clear. When you say about distributed organization, which of the companies would like to go for a distributed organization? What are the benefits there? Which kind of organizations would like to go?
Yeah. So you still have, let me just think what example we have in the paper. Sorry, in the paper we have obviously a couple of examples. So for each of them, we have examples in the paper. Oh gosh, it slipped me now which example we had.
That is fine. If you cannot give me a company's name, I was wondering from which sector, or if they have. Would you like to say that these people have not yet reached the global level, and that is why they're not going for global virtual or hubs and satellites? I am trying to understand why they're not going for hubs and satellites or global virtual. Why distributed? That was not clear to me.
So here, I mean, if you're more here or more here, it depends obviously on your task context. If you need people to come more into the office.
Got it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you need them in commuting distance, for example, that they really come into the office to do innovative work, to do a lot of onboarding, to do a lot of knowledge exchange, you're probably more here. Right? If you think actually for them coming into the office is not so much an issue, I can have them in any international location and maybe we meet up. I fly them in every couple of months, once a year into the office. That's enough. Yeah. Then you can be more into that transactional. And then, as we said, I mean, obviously the internationalization, there is this benefit obviously of dispersion and around the access of markets, around the access of talent and specifically. I mean, here really is the access to talent is a key one, but you balance it against the cost of coordination.
Right.
I mean, there's for example, different employment legislation in each country, and they were really saying they underestimated that sometimes that you have different employment law. You have different taxation. You have all these kind of things that are actually more coordination intensive than they initially thought, right? Initially, think you can just hire in any jurisdiction, and it's the hiring is straightforward enough. But even just from a HR perspective and from a tax perspective, it comes with a lot of knock-on implication, benefits, compensation, so forth. So that's what you're weighing off here. Between the high and the low in terms of how much you disperse your employees.
Yeah, right. So because I was trying to, it's such a beautiful article. I was trying to segregate the organization which I know of in different kinds of partitions, and I could find lots of them in large hubs and virtual centric, global virtual and hubs and satellites, but I could find very few for distributed organization. So I was trying to kind of identify why not the distributed one. So I guess that depends on scale also.
Yeah, no, I think Purvi, you're probably right that it's this kind of model where you think, well, why not even push it a little bit further, right? Yeah, and you're probably right that I mean that's one thing obviously we haven't done, but I think it would be really cool to actually look at where do we tend to see most firms, right? To your point.
I found that part very interesting. So do you think it had a relationship with the scale of the organization? The smaller might go for distributed because they cannot afford a global virtual. They don't want to risk a global virtual, and they do not have the resources for hubs and satellites. Do you think that matters?
It could be, absolutely, yeah. I would think so as well. I mean, obviously there is here we're really talking big investment, right? We're talking, we're taking out leases, there might be high renting, and typically they're leasing offices at this stage, I suppose. The little satellites are a little bit more cost efficient because it could be, you know, shared office space, perhaps. So that's probably cost efficient enough. But it's absolutely also a scale. So you could, to your point, you could perhaps envision, right, an evolution across the frameworks or movement across. There you go. This is your future research.
So maybe I can write a paper with you. Wow. Thanks a lot. That really helps. And that was so interesting. It's a beautiful model. If you agree, I would like to share this with my students. This wonderful paper of yours.
Thank you. Yeah, and I can, if it's of use, I can email to Anush that slide as well, because that's obviously not published in the article.
Yeah.
But
this
I think
beautiful.
Yeah, I think this one is so much better than the other one.
Right. And we have this in our course syllabus. We have this kind of global HR models. We have matrix model and vertical and distributed. So students would love to know what is the latest thing which is coming and being published. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I absolutely. And the future obviously is this hybrid working. So it is.
And these students are getting a very practical, learning. We had all this in theories and books, and they are seeing everything going virtual, really in their own lives. So that is definitely something that will interest them.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right, because some of these models that we teach, right, they're 1980s, 1990s. They're all pre-digitization, really.
Very true.
So it's a lot of, I think as an academic, it's an exciting time at the moment because we're really, it's so disruptive in many ways. There's loads of opportunities.
Very true. Yeah, it has been a blessing in disguise. This COVID has been a blessing in disguise because I have been seeing my husband is working an IT professional, and he's been working on teams and he's been working with virtual organizations. But I was teaching is just theoretically, and now I could collaborate with people around the world, and that was a learning in itself.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's a wonderful work you're doing out there.
Thanks.
Anuj, would you like to ask something, or should we open the floor for the participants? Yes, Anuj is on mute.
You might be on mute.
Oh, Anuj, you're not audible. So I think some issue with his mic.
No, Anuj, we can't hear you.
Okay, can I ask one more question till then?
Yeah, or he might be typing. Is the time change has changed? The time change.
Yeah, just let me.
So I'm just watching the chat here as well.
From born global to born digital.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's these labels, right? I mean, born global. Yeah, I mean, born global, obviously it was, it's a type of firm, right, that internationalizes very early and very aggressively, and sort of you're born in international markets. So it means early, it's associated with early and rapid internationalization, typically. With born digital, I suppose the association is that you're born on the internet. So both are obviously different types of firms, different labels. I'll be very happy personally with this label, born global. It's always a challenge, isn't it, if you're using certain labels? But it's, yeah, both describe a different type of firms. For those of you that are doing research, I would personally, I would say born digitals is the more exciting area maybe for doing research for the reasons that we mentioned. Born globals, I mean, it does feel a bit like 1990s.
Right, so true. But don't you think now the organizations have become a mix of born global and born digital? We see those startups, especially the tech-based startups, the technopreneurs, they are going so fast.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're audible.
Okay, thank you.
So, they're going so fast to being global, the way you were saying, accidentally global. So kind of they're always like one of my cousins has started an IT organizations, and he's already dealing with people from Germany and everything, though it's a startup. So I feel the organizations have got a wonderful platform where they're like, because they're digital, they're global. Don't you think so?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's a beauty, but also a challenge. I mean, as you said, like your market reach is instantaneous, which offers you all types of opportunities. But then, and I think maybe that global scaling paper that I mentioned speaks about more also the challenges that come with it. Because to really penetrate these markets and to have a solid international position, to really develop your firm quickly into a leading global organization, it's still a different ball game, right? This is not accident. I mean, even let's say Zoom, right? Like, I mean, obviously Zoom took off in the pandemic. We're actually working on that. That's in the pipeline. But and many say, oh, it was an accident in a sense. But obviously the pandemic, no one could foresee. But Zoom has been scaling in the background and putting the infrastructure in place, hiring aggressively, building out the technology, their offices for many, many years. So they had the organizational foundation in place. Obviously, then came the unanticipated surge in demand, but that enabled them to take off. Without this underlying scaling that they have been doing in scaling the organization in the background across international markets, my prediction is it would have not happened. So for those of you maybe that are interested in this, but that's why we did this global scaling piece. It's quite interesting in that because it speaks about this rapid development into a really global firm, right? So and that it's for those firms that really succeed, it's not an accident.
Very true. Like they might have a disruptive innovation at a low scale, but unless and until they give value for money or really value to their customers, they cannot become global when such like incident happened, like a pandemic. So there has to be a value and there has to be a structure, foundation before they can reach out.
Yeah, absolutely, exactly. So you need this global, what we define this term, this global business model. So yeah, as to your point, you need to have a value proposition and a way of delivering that value proposition that is non-location bound, right? So you need to have a good value proposition, a solid business model that addresses a homogeneous need across markets. So that's a non-location, gives you a non-location bound advantage as a firm. And then you're trying to replicate it obviously across markets very, very quickly. But even in that replication, obviously there's challenges, right? It's not a smooth process. But it's very fast. I find that fascinating because obviously, as you said, it's this digital firms have all these opportunities, but understanding what are really the key bottlenecks that they face into internationalization and how can we alleviate them? I think we're just scratching the surface. And also how it is maybe for different types of the digital business model. You know, it's different, obviously, if you're a digital platform vis-a-vis maybe a pipeline-based business. If you're selling to consumers or if you're selling to businesses. So I think it's really, really fascinating to look at the bottlenecks, the challenges. I mean, obviously they have to reach, that's given, but the challenges, the technological affordances and what that really means, different types of business models. Yeah, I mean, we're just scratching the surface, I think, on digital strategies and digital internationalization.
So true, because you know, the models I have been teaching, like the cage model and all, even the Borders model, lots of them talk about the geographical distances between the businesses and the corporate, and suddenly that has vanished because of this pandemic. So suddenly the digital organizations, or the organizations which have digital resources, are suddenly like have an opportunity to capture these values if only they can scale up globally.
Yeah, exactly. So these kind of frictions that are associated with physical distance or physical, I mean, they're removed, absolutely, but still a lot of other distances obviously still remain in place. It's very I think it's a very exciting exciting topic. I don't know, Anush, if you wanted to ask me something. I don't know, because I'm also senior editor in the Journal of World Business. I don't know if that I'm on the editorial board of the Journal of International Business Studies. So if there's any questions also maybe around the academic journals, we could also touch upon that if you wished. It's up to you.
No, if you want to, like I myself want to crack like Journal of International Business, as international business is your forte, my forte. So how we can obviously it is 50-50. The strategy will be different. So how we can prepare for that, like Journal of International Business. You have two publication I've seen in that Journal of International Business. It's an academy.
Yeah, for Journal of International Business Studies, or JWB. I mean, they're probably fairly similar. So I would fundamentally say, pick a big question, pick a really, really good research question, really do, I mean, something, a big trend, pick a big trend, a big area where you can really, where you have a lot of scope for making a potential contribution. And then, I mean, do really, really good, invest in the quality of what you do for the study. Because once
I want to ask you, like, when we study about cross culture, we have two models, like Hofstede and another one is Hall's model. Like, can we work like something creative, some new model which comes to your mind, which has not been explored yet, and we can I can or other faculties can work on that, and we can go for publication. Like when you talk about cross cultural differences, any other model comes to your mind which has not been explored yet?
On cross culture.
Yes, in international business.
Actually, Anush, you know what? And what I would perhaps think, I mean, they're quite established topics, right? Obviously, a lot of, and I think in JIBS, they had a commentary, was it 1 or 2 years ago, when they really speak about cross-culture and where that field is. So it's a very mature area of research, very, very mature. So I'm always hesitant in doing research in very, very mature areas, because you really have to have a really, really good idea. A lot of smart people have gone before you. I mean, I'm not saying there isn't, but I don't know what that is, right? So I find that always, for myself, a riskier strategy. But I think what I have been done well is I've picked always quite new phenomena. I started looking into these scaling firms, right, 10 years ago, these digital firms, when it was new. So I would really think, what are the big topics? SDGs are big. Social, development goals. You are in India, so that's a cool context to think about developing world, SDGs, questions along that. So I would think about, what are the big questions that we need answers for at the moment. I would think about, where do you have unique access to data? Also, I mean, here in Ireland, as I said, we have all these digital firms at our doorstep. I could get really cool access. So also think about something, where you have your location-specific advantage, maybe in terms of gathering data to answer this question really, really well. Then I would just do really, really good work. I would obviously try to go to the conferences or to the paper development workshops by these journals, because if you can go to the paper development workshops that the Journal of International Business Studies, for example, offers, they offer them mostly at all big conferences. What you get an hour for your paper, and 2 or 3 senior scholars will comment on your paper before you submit it. I mean, that's a super opportunity to really improve your paper before you submit it. And then I would go for it. Sorry, there are my 3 points of advice.
Okay, thank you very much. As we are coming close to time, anyone else want to ask anything? Any participant? Any question? The floor is open. You can ask from Esther whatever you want to ask. Anyone? It should be international business. It should be publication.
But it's also, I would really want to give a word of encouragement. Look, when I did my PhD, I never thought I would publish in the Journal of International Business Studies, right? I mean, they tell you this is like the big journal. I managed 1. Now I have 5, right? So I think if you do good work, interesting work,
Okay.
And I think, look, I mean, if you're an editor, what you're looking for is new, fresh ideas for important topics, if that makes sense. So I would really pick kind of topics that you think, okay, if you start a study now, in 2 or 3 years, right? What will we want answers for? What are the new phenomena that we really need to need explanations for.
Okay.
Because, you know, that's obviously probably the lead time that it will take for you to collect, analyze data, unless you have a really good data set already. Sometimes maybe then also, perhaps at a later stage, you could think about bringing co-authors on board, maybe that have published in those journals before to help framing maybe certain papers. But, you know, I would only do that if I really like the person and maybe at a later stage. But it depends, obviously, what different things work for different people. But if you have good ideas, really good data, really good stories, people, you will place them really well.
Okay. Thank you. That's I guess we will not take much of your time. Like yesterday you told me 11:25, so it's 11:25. And on behalf of APJ School of Management and Bharati Vidyapeeth Institute of Management and Research, I'd like to thank you. We are honored that Dr. Esther Tippman, you joined us all the way from Dublin, Ireland. There were some technical hiccups, but those technical hiccups you overcome and you joined us today. And it was, you know, your session, if I reflect upon, it was completely always sense of creativity and new knowledge is always imbibed in your session. I always see you whenever you discuss something. You are the person who always talks about models and all. When I was a student at the time, also I've learned many models from you in international business. Today also, when I was seeing your paper and seeing your presentation, so it was completely knowledge enhancement for all the participants whosoever joined. And you have you are the guest of honor for our conference, and you complete, you know, the way you have presented yours the last 1 hour, we were completely thinking this is doable, this is doable. So I'm honored and I'm very thankful to you once again. Over to you, Purvi ma'am. You can say thanks, and that's all from my side.
Thank you, Esther. For me personally, it was lots of learning. As I said, I'm a faculty of international business. So a budding researcher also with Anuj specifically has been guiding me how to publish. And your model was exemplary. And as I said, the beauty lied in its simplicity. It was wonderful. I had a great time. So thank you so much. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, no, thanks. Really, really my pleasure. And I'm really sorry about it again yesterday. I'm German, right? So being on time and not forgetting things. if something like that happens, it really did annoy me. So, but I'm happy it worked out today. And thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Me today.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thanks again.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Okay.
everyone.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Please join on the same link in valedictory at 4:30. Okay.
Thank
Esther,
you,
if
all
you
the
are free, you can
participants.
join valedictory in another half an hour. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.